My name is Emma Walker. I'm 30 years old, and I've always considered myself good at expecting the unexpected. As a medical researcher, surprises are part of my job, especially when working on groundbreaking treatments. But nothing, not even years of navigating the unpredictable twists of my career, could have prepared me for the shock I felt when I pulled onto my street and found nearly 100 cars lining every available space. It was Friday evening, and I was coming home a day early from a medical conference in San Francisco, exhausted and craving the simple comfort of my own bed. Initially, I assumed someone in the neighborhood was hosting a big party, maybe a block gathering. But as I approached my driveway, reality slowly settled in every vehicle, each with a license plate or bumper sticker. Vaguely familiar from distant childhood memories, belonged to someone from my family. Confusion gripped me tightly as I parked a few houses away, dragging my suitcase along the sidewalk. From outside my house, I heard laughter and faint music, the kind that fills rooms during happy reunions. My footsteps slowed as I reached my front porch, heart beating faster with each step. When I opened the door, noise exploded around me, a chaotic symphony of overlapping conversations, clinking glasses, and the squeals of children chasing each other through the rooms. I stood frozen in my entryway suitcase still in hand, eyes wide with disbelief. My cozy home had been transformed into a crowded gathering place filled to the brim with people I barely recognized. Then, through the chaos, my gaze settled on a giant banner stretched across the living room wall, proudly declaring, "Family means forever." The irony wasn't lost on me. For most of my life, family had meant feeling invisible, overlooked, and misunderstood. As I stood rooted to the spot, unable to fully process the bizarre scene, a distant cousin whose name escaped me turned and gasped, "Oh my gosh, Emma, you're home early." Instantly, the room quieted down, all eyes turning toward me. Conversations faded into whispers, and my cheeks burned as the weight of everyone's attention settled onto me. My mother emerged from the crowd, her smile bright, but clearly strained. "Emma, we thought you'd be home tomorrow." She approached with arms wide, her hug mechanical and brief, carrying none of the warmth I'd always hoped for. Tyler, my older brother, appeared next, a look of panic briefly crossing his face before he forced a casual grin. "Hey sis, surprise. It's just a little family reunion." His voice faltered, the lie obvious in the sheer scale of the gathering. My heart pounded harder. Little reunion. My voice shook slightly as I took in the sea of faces around me. There must be close to 100 people here. My sister-in-law Haley chimed in with misplaced pride. 99 exactly. We've been planning this for months." Months. The word echoed painfully. I had not been invited, informed, or considered. Every careful detail, the food, the photos decorating the walls, the furniture rearranged to accommodate guests, had been meticulously planned, without my knowledge. Feeling increasingly out of place, my mind raced, replaying every past slight and moment of exclusion I'd endured. This was more than just an oversight. It was a glaring reminder of how separate I had always felt from the people I was supposed to call my family. As my relatives gradually returned to their conversations, clearly choosing to ignore the awkwardness that hung heavily in the air, I slowly backed away. My throat tightened and my chest grew heavy with disappointment and hurt. Standing in the very home I'd worked hard to buy a home, now occupied by strangers and distant relatives, I realized the painful truth. Sometimes family means forever, but forever can also mean facing consequences for actions no one wants to acknowledge. Growing up in the quaint, rain-soaked town of Edmonds, just north of Seattle, my childhood was outwardly ordinary, but quietly lonely. Our modest home stood on a street lined with tall pine trees, the kind that whispered gently in the constant drizzle. To outsiders, we appeared like the picture-perfect family. Yet beneath that calm exterior lay a subtle imbalance I felt deeply, even as a little girl. From my earliest memories, my older brother Tyler was the center of our family's universe. He was outgoing and athletic, the kind of kid whose report cards filled our refrigerator door with pride, even when his grades were barely average. When I brought home straight A's, the paper was praised with a quick smile and then quickly forgotten. One afternoon, when I was 9, I proudly handed my mother a painting I'd worked on all day. It was a landscape of the Olympic mountains, carefully drawn and painted in vibrant shades of blues and greens. My mum glanced at it briefly, nodding, then turned immediately to Tyler, who walked in proudly holding a simple wooden birdhouse he'd made at school. My painting ended up in a drawer, eventually forgotten, but Tyler's birdhouse stayed displayed prominently on our living room mantel for years. I felt a confusing mix of pride for my brother and a quiet sadness for myself. It was as if no matter how hard I tried, nothing I created or achieved would ever truly matter. Throughout my teenage years, the distance between my family and me only widened. Tyler's baseball games were like local events, complete with cheering crowds of relatives and neighbors. I often sat quietly in the stands, cheering as loudly as everyone else, hoping someone would notice how supportive I was trying to be. But when it was my turn to shine, like the time my debate team reached the state finals, the seats reserved for family were empty. I told myself it didn't matter that I was strong enough not to care, but the sight of other parents cheering on their kids filled me with an aching emptiness that lingered long after the applause faded. In high school, my father was the only person who ever seemed to quietly acknowledge my successes. He rarely expressed his pride publicly, but sometimes late at night when everyone else was asleep. He'd knock softly on my door and whisper how proud he was of me. Those rare moments felt precious, like tiny beams of sunlight breaking through clouds, fleeting yet powerful. Then just before my senior year, we lost him suddenly to a heart attack. The house, already feeling distant and cold, became even more isolating after his death. Without my father's quiet acknowledgement, it felt as though I had become completely invisible. I threw myself into academics, driven by a need for approval that never came. When I graduated as valedictorian, I stood nervously at the podium, scanning the audience for my mother's face. She was there physically, but her attention seemed elsewhere, distracted by a text message or conversation with Tyler sitting next to her. When I finished my speech, other students hugged their parents' tears, streaming down faces filled with pride and joy. I approached my family cautiously, hoping maybe this time they would see me clearly. My mother gave me a quick pat on the shoulder, saying simply, "Good job," before shifting focus back to Tyler, who was talking about his plans to join our uncle's insurance business. College offered an escape, a chance to reinvent myself beyond my family's shadow. Studying medical research became my passion, a way to channel the longing for validation into something meaningful. I earned scholarships, received glowing recommendations from professors, and even secured a prestigious internship at a top research hospital. Each accomplishment felt bittersweet, though overshadowed by the emptiness of knowing the people who should be cheering loudest barely acknowledged my existence. After every award ceremony or graduation, I'd inevitably call home, still clinging to a sliver of hope. The conversations were brief, filled mostly with updates on Tyler's growing success in business, his marriage, and his life milestones. At my medical school graduation, I paused briefly while crossing the stage again, searching the crowd for familiar faces. Tyler and my mother were there, sitting quietly, politely clapping. Their applause lacked the warmth and enthusiasm I craved, and once again the spotlight quickly returned to Tyler, who had recently been promoted at work. My mother spent the reception talking about Tyler's career to anyone who would listen, barely mentioning my achievements. I smiled through it, pretending it didn't matter. But deep down, the sting of rejection felt sharper than ever. It seemed no matter how far I went, how much I accomplished, I would never measure up. After years of feeling invisible, I learned to cope by burying myself deeper into my work, telling myself that approval from strangers, from mentors, from patients was enough. Yet as I returned home that night, holding a diploma that represented years of sacrifice and effort, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the quiet, empty walls. Loneliness settled heavily over me, a familiar companion. It wasn't that my family actively disliked me. They simply didn't see me as if I existed just beyond the edge of their focus. I began to wonder if something about me was inherently flawed, somehow unworthy of their attention or pride. That insecurity became a persistent whisper in my life, shaping my interactions and self-image for years to come. Now, standing in my own home years later, faced with dozens of relatives who had never truly acknowledged me before, those old wounds reopened painfully, I realized the profound depth of emotional neglect I'd silently endured. The ache of being overlooked felt fresh again, as if every small slight from childhood until now had returned in one overwhelming wave. After my father passed away, the question of what to do with our childhood home quickly became a major topic in our family. Tyler suggested we buy the property together to ease our mother's financial burden. The idea seemed sensible at the time, a practical solution that I hoped would also bridge the emotional gap that had grown between us over the years. I put most of my savings from my research fellowship into the down payment, feeling proud to contribute to something meaningful. Tyler, on the other hand, relied mostly on financial support from his wife Haley's affluent parents. Still, I convinced myself that the source of funds didn't matter. This was about family and reconnecting. We agreed to clear boundaries. Tyler and Haley would live on the main floor. I would take the upstairs, and our mother would move into a renovated space above the garage. My attorney insisted on detailed agreements about shared spaces, though at the time these formalities felt overly cautious. I didn't imagine my family would ever take advantage of me. At first, things seemed fine, and I convinced myself that this arrangement would finally heal old wounds. Soon, though, I noticed subtle invasions of my privacy. I'd return home from the lab to find my mother rearranging my living room furniture or rifling through cabinets in my kitchen without asking for permission. Each time she'd smile dismissively and say something like, "Emma family doesn't need invitations." I tried explaining gently that even families should respect basic boundaries, but she shrugged off my concerns. Eventually, I started locking my door, though. Even that felt uncomfortable, as if I were the outsider in my own home. Meanwhile, Tyler and Haley became the neighborhood socialites, hosting gatherings nearly every weekend. Invitations to these events always arrived at the last minute when my schedule was already set with research commitments. Gradually, I began to realize they were deliberately timing these events for weekends when they knew I would be busy. Occasionally, I'd rearrange my schedule, hoping to join in and reconnect with family and neighbors. But whenever I did, I found myself feeling like a guest rather than a co-owner. Tyler often dominated the conversations, enthusiastically discussing his successes in business, while my own career achievements went unmentioned and unnoticed. One Christmas, my research was featured in a prestigious medical journal, something that deeply excited me. When I brought it up at the holiday dinner table, hoping for even a brief acknowledgement, my mother responded politely but quickly changed the subject to Tyler's recent promotion. The conversation around me buzzed with congratulations for him, while my announcement faded quietly into the background. Even small things started to grate on my nerves. Items from my apartment would mysteriously disappear later, found downstairs, borrowed without permission. My kitchen appliances and cookware would turn up dirty in Haley's kitchen, or worse, damaged from careless use during their frequent parties. When confronted, Haley offered half-hearted apologies, brushing off my frustrations as trivial. Tyler became increasingly defensive, accusing me of being overly sensitive or uptight. Every conversation ended with me feeling unheard and disrespected, leaving an unsettling tension hanging heavily between us. The more these intrusions occurred, the clearer it became that the boundaries we'd agreed upon weren't just blurry, they were non-existent. My space, the very thing that represented independence and achievement to me, was being quietly eroded by those closest to me. The emotional toll of constantly feeling disrespected in my own home began weighing heavily on my mind. To protect my personal space, I installed an additional lock on my apartment door. Initially, it felt like reclaiming control, but soon it only intensified my anxiety. Each time I turned that lock, a small voice whispered that it shouldn't have come to this, that families should never require such drastic measures. Meanwhile, financial transparency became another source of tension. Tyler and Haley frequently made home improvements or threw extravagant gatherings, never consulting me despite our joint ownership agreement. Each new expense further strained our relationship, especially when I gently requested clarification or fair sharing of these costs. My mother usually sided with Tyler, framing my concerns as petty or overly rigid. I often felt like a child again, quietly accepting unfairness rather than causing confrontation. Deep down, I knew my avoidance was only fueling further disrespect, but confrontation had always felt emotionally exhausting. One evening, returning from yet another research conference, I found my apartment door ajar and lights on inside. My stomach tightened instantly, feeling violated, as I discovered Haley and her friends casually lounging on my furniture, sipping wine without a care. Haley apologized casually, claiming Tyler had said I wouldn't mind. I quietly expressed my discomfort, and they left soon after. But the damage was done. I felt utterly disregarded and invisible, unable to shake off the deep frustration. That night, sitting alone surrounded by reminders of this latest intrusion, the full weight of the situation became clear. This wasn't a single misunderstanding. It was a pattern, a deliberate disregard for my feelings and rights. The stress of constantly having to assert boundaries was becoming overwhelming. I began considering alternative living arrangements, knowing that something needed to change before the emotional strain became unbearable. Yet despite everything, a small part of me clung desperately to hope, the hope that things could somehow improve. That hope, mixed with the painful knowledge of my family's persistent disregard, set the stage for the emotional explosion that was soon to come. Standing frozen in my entryway, the laughter and conversation swirled around me like a storm. It took a moment for the full weight of the betrayal to settle over me heavier with each passing second. My eyes darted around, catching snippets of familiar faces, mixed with those I hardly recognized. All gathered here, celebrating in my home without my knowledge. I slowly moved through the crowded rooms, noticing subtle changes that spoke volumes. Family photos lined the walls, yet in nearly all of them I was strangely absent. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's family reunion, except the backdrop was my personal space. As I navigated toward my apartment upstairs, dread tightened my chest, anticipating what else I might find. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, disbelief turned quickly into anger. Suitcases belonging to strangers were stacked haphazardly in corners, and air mattresses cluttered my carefully arranged home office. My heart sank further when I noticed someone had taken down my medical certificates from the walls, replacing them carelessly with children's artwork, taped haphazardly over my accomplishments. A deep ache filled my throat as I picked up one of my grandmother's antique perfume bottles, now shattered, its delicate fragments scattered across my bathroom tiles. My grandmother had treasured these, passing them down to me as cherished heirlooms, but now they lay broken, discarded like meaningless trash. A wave of indignation surged through me, hot and raw, followed by an overwhelming sense of violation. My bedroom, my sanctuary from the pressures of my demanding career, had been casually invaded and rearranged without a second thought. My possessions, things I'd carefully chosen or been lovingly gifted, had been treated as if they held no value or sentiment. In the quiet chaos of that moment, the betrayal crystallized with stunning clarity. My family had intentionally chosen the weekend of my conference, fully aware I would be absent to stage this massive event. They had used my home, my things, and even worse, they'd done so without a shred of consideration or respect for me. I took slow, steady breaths, fighting to regain composure as my emotions churned fiercely inside. Anger, deep and biting, mingled with a sadness so profound it left me numb. How could my family people I'd spent years trying to earn acceptance from deliberately orchestrate something so hurtful? Just then, Tyler appeared behind me, his face flushed with embarrassment. He hesitated briefly before quietly saying, "Emma, it's not as bad as you think. We assumed you wouldn't mind." His tone carried an underlying defensiveness, as if he believed my feelings of betrayal were somehow unreasonable. I turned slowly, facing him directly, eyes blazing with disbelief and hurt. "Not as bad as I think," I repeated, my voice trembling despite my effort to remain steady. "You organized a gathering of nearly 100 people, invaded my private space, used my personal belongings, and intentionally scheduled it when I wasn't supposed to be home. How could you think this was okay?" He opened his mouth to respond, but paused, clearly at a loss for words. Haley appeared next to him, placing a protective hand on his shoulder, her expression equally unapologetic. "Emma, they're family. It's not like strangers are invading your home," she argued, dismissing the severity of their actions. My eyes moved slowly across the room, the scattered belongings of people I barely recognized proving otherwise. As my family stood silently, their eyes shifting with unease and vague annoyance, the depth of their disrespect hit me harder than ever before. I realized then painfully that this was not a misunderstanding, but a deliberate, conscious choice they had made, one that revealed just how little I truly meant to them. Tyler shifted uneasily, glancing away from my gaze as Haley squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. My mother stood slightly behind them, arms crossed defensively, a look of impatience clouding her features. The uncomfortable silence stretched painfully before Tyler finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emma, we need to talk about the house." My stomach tightened immediately, sensing this conversation would confirm my worst suspicions. "What about the house, Tyler?" I asked calmly, despite the hurt clawing at my chest. He hesitated, clearing his throat awkwardly before continuing. "We've run into some financial trouble. Haley and I made a few investments that didn't work out, and now we're struggling." My mother's eyes narrowed slightly, silently, urging Tyler to speak clearly. He sighed heavily, finally admitting, "We thought if we planned this reunion, made everyone feel welcome and comfortable here, you'd see how much the house means to the family. Maybe you'd be more willing to sell your share to us." His words landed like a heavy blow, each syllable driving deeper the realization of just how calculated their actions had been. This wasn't just disrespect, it was manipulation, an attempt to force my hand by making me feel isolated within my own family. My own brother, supported silently by my mother, had staged this entire event to corner me financially and emotionally. "You could have just talked to me," I managed quietly, voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and anger. "Instead, you chose to invade my home, use my belongings, even break my grandmother's heirlooms, all to pressure me into selling." My mother stepped forward sharply, her voice carrying a hint of annoyance. "Emma, don't make this more dramatic than it needs to be. It's just a house, and we all know you barely use it anyway. You're always at work or away at conferences." I stared at her, disbelief giving way to a wave of indignation. Just a house, I repeated quietly. I invested my life savings to keep this place thinking it would help bring us closer as a family. But instead of respecting that you chose manipulation, my voice rose slightly, fueled by years of bottled up frustration and hurt. This isn't about me rarely being home mum. It's about trust, respect, and decency, all of which you completely ignored. Tyler looked down, visibly uncomfortable. His voice strained as he finally spoke again. We didn't mean it to feel like manipulation. We just thought this was our best option. You have your career and your independence, and we have nothing left. The raw honesty in his words cut deeper than any insult could. They weren't just betraying me, they were using their own vulnerability to justify their behavior. The weight of their desperation didn't ease my anger. It deepened the ache of betrayal. I took a deep breath, regaining composure before responding slowly, firmly. If you'd just been honest, if you'd respected me enough to discuss this openly, things could have been different. But instead, you chose deceit, and you showed me exactly how little my feelings mean to you. The silence afterward felt suffocating. Tyler's eyes met mine briefly, reflecting shame, but still carrying a hint of frustration. My mother looked away, entirely unwilling or unable to acknowledge the pain they'd caused. Turning away from them, I felt clarity settle over me. The truth was painful but freeing. It revealed just how damaged our relationships were, but also clarified the necessity of setting firm boundaries. This confrontation wasn't just an end, it marked a painful but necessary beginning of something else, something built on respect for myself above all. After the confrontation, I retreated quietly to my room, closing the door firmly behind me. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I allowed myself a brief moment to breathe, absorbing the shock and pain from the truth I'd just uncovered. Yet even amidst the turmoil, clarity began to settle in, quickly replacing my confusion with resolve. I knew reacting emotionally wouldn't solve anything. It would only reinforce their narrative of me as the difficult outsider. Instead, I took a deep breath and reached for my phone, methodically capturing photos of my violated space. Each snapshot, broken heirlooms, moved furniture, personal belongings disturbed, felt painful, yet necessary, reinforcing the extent of their betrayal. With quiet determination, I documented everything, meticulously time-stamping each image to ensure accuracy. Next, I opened my laptop, compiling notes and descriptions of every detail I could recall, laying a strong foundation for whatever came next. I felt empowered by each deliberate action, as though reclaiming the dignity they'd tried to strip away. Later that evening, after most guests had departed, a soft knock interrupted my careful documentation. Opening the door, I found Aunt Grace standing quietly in the hallway, a gentle expression on her face. She offered a comforting smile and asked softly, "Can I come in?" We settled into the quiet of my disrupted room, Aunt Grace carefully sitting on the edge of the bed. "Emma," she began gently, her voice calm yet serious. "I didn't know about this reunion until I arrived today. When Tyler and your mum told us about it, they assured everyone you knew and approved." I shook my head slowly, the sting of that lie still fresh. "I had no idea. They planned everything behind my back." Aunt Grace sighed deeply, nodding with empathy as she absorbed my words. "There's something else," she continued, lowering her voice cautiously. "Last night I overheard Tyler and Haley talking with a financial advisor in the kitchen. Apparently their investments failed terribly and they're deep in debt. The advisor mentioned the house might be their only way out." Her revelation matched exactly what Tyler had admitted earlier, but hearing it again from Aunt Grace solidified its painful truth. This was calculated manipulation driven by desperation, but executed with a complete lack of respect or decency. Yet knowing the depth of their financial crisis didn't soften my resolve. It reinforced it. "Aunt Grace, I began quietly choosing my words with care. Thank you for telling me. This confirms exactly why I need to take action. Her gentle eyes watched me thoughtfully as she nodded understandingly. Emma, your father would have been heartbroken by this, she said softly. He was proud of you always. Even when others failed to see your worth, he saw it clearly. Her words resonated deeply, stirring memories of late-night encouragements whispered gently by my father. I blinked away tears, suddenly feeling his quiet strength guiding me once again. Aunt Grace reached into her pocket, pulling out a small velvet pouch and handing it to me. Inside was a delicate gold necklace, holding a tiny photograph of my father smiling proudly at one of my graduations. Aunt Grace smiled warmly, saying, I had planned to give you this tomorrow during the family gathering, but I think you need it now. Remember, Emma, you are valued even if others fail to see it. Holding the necklace in my palm, I felt my father's love wrap around me, fortifying my determination. My next steps became crystal clear. Protecting myself emotionally and legally was now my top priority. I thanked Aunt Grace sincerely, promising myself I'd never again compromise my dignity for those who didn't value me. The next morning, I scheduled an appointment with Barbara, my attorney explaining the entire situation calmly and precisely. Her response was swift and reassuring, immediately offering strategic legal advice. Documenting everything was wise. Barbara assured me, outlining the practical steps I could take to assert my rights clearly. Our conversation strengthened my confidence further, laying out a detailed plan for moving forward. Barbara explained we could legally require Tyler and my mother to respect the boundaries we'd initially agreed upon, possibly even forcing a buyout or clear financial arrangement. Each option felt empowering, reminding me I still held power despite their betrayal. As soon as we ended the call, I began taking immediate steps. I secured vital documents, moved valuable personal belongings into safe storage, and contacted a locksmith to install additional security measures for my private spaces. With each action, I reclaimed a piece of control they'd tried to take from me. During this careful process, I refused to engage emotionally or confrontationally with my family. When Tyler or my mother attempted communication, I responded politely but firmly, insisting that any discussions happen in writing or through my attorney. Maintaining this strategic boundary was challenging, but it also provided a crucial emotional barrier. Days later, as my preparations progressed, I received an unexpected message. A prestigious international medical institute was offering me a position based on my recent research. The timing was almost poetic, a perfect moment to reclaim my life and career fully away from the toxic influence of my family. The offer presented not only professional fulfillment, but also the emotional space I'd long needed to heal. Sitting alone that evening, reflecting on everything, I felt a profound sense of liberation. Yes, the betrayal had been devastating, but from its ashes, had risen clarity, strength, and self-respect. I recognized now that I deserved more than a family willing to exploit me, and the path forward was finally mine alone to choose. The painful truth my family had revealed about themselves was no longer a burden. It had become my turning point, pushing me forward with renewed purpose. Moving toward my new future, I embraced the certainty that true respect, validation, and value came not from pleasing others, but from standing firmly in my truth. This moment, born from betrayal, had become the most empowering of my life. Stepping off the plane in Geneva felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for far too long. The cool, crisp air greeted me, promising a fresh start, thousands of miles from the emotional turmoil I'd left behind. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely free, ready to embrace a new chapter built entirely on my terms. Settling into my new life happened quickly, almost effortlessly. My apartment overlooked Lake Geneva, offering a view of shimmering water framed by distant snow-capped mountains. Each morning as I sipped coffee on my balcony, the serene beauty reminded me of my journey not just geographically, but emotionally as well. My role at the International Research Institute exceeded every expectation, finally providing the respect and recognition I had always craved. Colleagues welcomed me warmly, genuinely valuing my expertise and contributions. For the first time, I felt fully seen, appreciated for exactly who I was and what I brought to the table. Yet even as my professional dreams flourished, my family's reactions to my departure ranged from awkward silence to desperate pleas. Tyler occasionally sent strained emails attempting apologies, without fully acknowledging the depth of his betrayal. My mother's messages often alternated between anger and emotional appeals, designed to trigger guilt. At first, in turn, these attempts at communication unsettled me, stirring old doubts and insecurities. But gradually, I learned to recognize them for what they were: attempts to pull me back into the familiar dysfunction. With newfound clarity, I set firm boundaries, responding politely but minimally, ensuring each interaction reinforced the respect I'd established for myself. Over time, my resolve began to reshape those relationships subtly. Messages from Tyler grew less frequent, but more thoughtful, eventually admitting genuine regret over past actions. My mother occasionally acknowledged her mistakes, albeit reluctantly, yet each step was progress, however small. Months later, I received news from home. Tyler and Haley had welcomed their first child, a daughter. He shared the news cautiously, along with a sincere reflection on his fears about parenting. For the first time, he openly wondered if he was repeating unhealthy patterns from his childhood. I replied warmly, congratulating him and gently encouraging his new self-awareness. Our relationship, though still cautious, began slowly transforming into something more honest and respectful. Boundaries once viewed as barriers were becoming bridges carefully rebuilt through genuine reflection and cautious steps forward. Still, the foundation of my happiness remained firmly rooted in my newfound independence. Work continued to offer profound satisfaction, each successful project reminding me of my worth. Friendships blossomed, effortlessly built on mutual respect, shared values, and a genuine sense of community I'd never experienced before. One evening, hosting colleagues for dinner laughter echoed comfortably around my apartment, filling spaces previously occupied by tension and loneliness. Listening to their stories, sharing mine without hesitation, I felt deeply grateful. I'd found my people, those who valued authenticity above appearances, who celebrated success sincerely and without conditions. My closest friend Lucia, a fellow researcher originally from Brazil, often remarked on how much I'd changed. "Emma," she once observed gently, "you seem lighter, happier, as though a heavy weight has lifted." Her words resonated profoundly, capturing exactly how I felt: a sense of freedom, born from reclaiming my identity and boundaries. About a year after arriving, Tyler reached out with an unexpected offer to purchase my half of our shared house at full market value. The decision wasn't difficult. Accepting meant officially closing a painful chapter, but it also represented a new, healthier foundation for our sibling relationship. I agreed, feeling deep peace rather than regret. With the proceeds, I created a medical scholarship, honoring my father, a quiet tribute to the only family member who had consistently recognized my worth. That decision felt healing, allowing me to acknowledge my past while investing in a hopeful future. Even my mother, hearing of the scholarship, expressed quiet gratitude, recognizing for once the significance behind my actions. On the anniversary of my move, gazing out once more at the sparkling lake, I reflected deeply on my journey. The painful betrayal I'd faced had ultimately opened doors I never imagined existed, allowing me to redefine my boundaries, my relationships, and my very sense of self. Each painful step had brought me closer to true empowerment. teaching me invaluable lessons about self-respect and genuine happiness. In the end, my story wasn't just about escaping toxic relationships, but about embracing the powerful reality that I deserved better. I'd finally understood that genuine respect and love are built not on blood ties or obligations, but on mutual appreciation and kindness. By prioritizing myself, I discovered an authenticity and joy previously unimaginable. Looking ahead, I felt hopeful and strong confident in the boundaries I'd created and maintained. My new life in Switzerland symbolized more than just a geographic change. It was a testament to the courage I'd found within myself. Now each new day was filled with possibilities, a constant reminder of the strength that comes from honoring one's own truth. To anyone standing at the crossroads of difficult decisions, uncertain whether to stay in toxic patterns or forge a new path, I offer my story as proof of the powerful freedom found in choosing yourself. Embracing boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for a life filled with genuine fulfillment and happiness. I had finally found my peace, and with it the inspiring truth that I was enough exactly as I was. Reflecting on my journey, one phrase stays with me. Family means forever, but so do consequences. Those words resonate deeply because they capture the reality that family connections, even when strained, are powerful and lasting. Yet they also remind us that every action carries weight. Every decision creates ripples, and sometimes the consequences of those choices echo just as loudly. Choosing to walk away from my family's hurtful patterns was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but it was also one of the bravest. In prioritizing my own well-being, I discovered a strength I never knew existed within me. Setting boundaries wasn't an act of defiance, it was an act of profound self-love and respect. For years, I believed that maintaining relationships meant tolerating disrespect, bending myself to fit others' expectations. But now I understand that real family, whether related by blood or chosen by heart, is built on mutual respect, support, and genuine care. True love doesn't require us to compromise our dignity or accept harm disguised as affection. I've learnt that walking away from harmful situations doesn't weaken family bonds. It strengthens our connection to our own self-worth. Boundaries are not barriers meant to push people away, but guidelines that show others how we deserve to be treated. Establishing those boundaries allowed me to rebuild my sense of self, ultimately leading to relationships that are healthier and more authentic. Maybe you're facing something similar, struggling with relationships that cause more pain than joy. Perhaps you're questioning whether setting boundaries makes you selfish or unloving. Let me assure you, prioritizing your emotional health and self-respect isn't selfish, it's essential. Ask yourself honestly, is your family lifting you up or pulling you down? Do your relationships empower you, or do they drain your spirit and self-esteem? Realizing the answers to these questions can feel overwhelming, but confronting these truths is the first step toward genuine healing. I encourage you to consider your own boundaries and reflect on the relationships in your life. Have you experienced moments when you needed to redefine what family means to you? Have you ever had to make difficult decisions to protect your own emotional health and well-being? Please share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Hearing each other's experiences helps us understand. We're never truly alone, even when family lets us down. Your courage to speak openly could inspire someone else facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, I hope you'll carry one message forward. You deserve respect, understanding, and kindness, especially from the people closest to you. Sometimes the bravest, most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to set clear boundaries and step away from situations that cause you pain. Remember, your worth isn't determined by others' perceptions or acceptance. Your true family will recognize your value and respect your boundaries. Embrace the courage within yourself to seek relationships that uplift, empower, and genuinely appreciate you. Thank you so much for listening to my story, for reflecting alongside me, and for having the strength to choose yourself. Let this be the start of your own journey toward deeper self respect, healing, and true happiness.